Hi everyone, I'm Wapnick, and you're watching Ergativity and Friends. In Chapter 2, Section 2, which you're watching right now, we'll discuss how accusative, ergative, and neutral alignment can manifest in verb agreement. First, we'll take a look at two languages with accusative verb agreement. Then we'll examine two languages with ergative verb agreement. Finally, we'll see an example of a language that exhibits neutral alignment with respect to verb agreement. Let's get started. Consider the following data from Spanish. The boys sang well, George bought some apples yesterday, and I prepared a delicious cake. What do you notice? From 1a, it seems that verbs take the suffix o to agree with third-person singular s arguments, and from b, it seems they take the exact same suffix to agree with third-person singular a arguments. If we went on to examine some more data, we would start to see a pattern emerge. In Spanish, verbs use the inflections in to agree both with s arguments and with a arguments. What about o arguments? How do they behave with respect to verb agreement, you might ask? Well, in Spanish, verbs aren't inflected to agree with o arguments whatsoever. For example, in C, the verb prepare does nothing to indicate its o argument is third-person singular. Since in Spanish, S and A arguments behave similarly with respect to verb agreement, while O arguments behave differently, we could say that Spanish exhibits accusative alignment with respect to verb agreement. For another example of a language with accusative verb agreement, we can take a look at Swahili. Unlike in Spanish, where there is only one set of agreement inflections, in Swahili there are two sets of agreement inflections. We'll call these set 1 and set 2 respectively. With that in mind, consider the following data. The child is sleeping, the farmer saw us, and the children like Juma. What do you notice? In 4a, we see the verb take an inflection from set 1 to agree with its s argument, the child, and in b, we see the verb take a set 1 inflection to agree with its a argument, the farmer. Thus, in Swahili, it seems that verbs use set 1 inflections to agree both with s arguments and with a arguments. When it comes to o arguments, however, we notice something a bit different. Verbs do indeed agree with their o arguments, but whereas agreement with s and a involved the use of set 1 inflections, agreement with o involves the use of inflections from set 2. This is exactly what we observe in 4c. Here, the verb like takes a set 2 inflection to agree with its o argument, Juma. Because Swahili verb agreement treats s and a arguments similarly and o arguments differently, Swahili is, like Spanish, a language that exhibits accusative alignment with respect to verb agreement. The information presented in this section can be summarized as follows. Consider the following data from the Tupian language Karitiana. I listened, you hurt me, and I will hurt you. What do you notice? In 5a, we see the verb take the prefix to agree with its first-person singular s argument, and in 5b, we see the verb take the exact same prefix to agree with its first-person singular o argument. At this point, we might hypothesize that in Karitiana, verbs use the same inflections to agree both with s arguments and with o arguments. And this hypothesis seems to be correct. The agreement inflections for both s and o come from the table in 6. Let us now take a look at 4c. As illustrated by 4c, in Karitiana, verbs aren't inflected to agree with their a arguments whatsoever. Since in Karitiana, s and o arguments behave similarly with respect to verb agreement, while A arguments behave differently, we could say that Karitiana exhibits ergative alignment with respect to verb agreement. For another example of a language where verb agreement follows an ergative pattern, we can take a look at Selayarese, a language spoken in the Indonesian province of South Sulawesi. As was the case in Swahili, in Selayarese there are two different sets of agreement inflections. Keeping that in mind, let's examine the data in A. Baso sang, I took the money, and Baso called me. From 8A and 8B, it seems that verbs take inflections from set 1 to agree both with S arguments and with O arguments. When it comes to A arguments, however, it seems that verbs use inflections from set 2. In 8C, for example, the verb takes the set 2 inflection la to agree with its third person A argument, baso. So in Selayarese, S and O arguments behave similarly with respect to verb agreement, while A arguments behave differently. Accordingly, Selayarese exhibits ergative alignment with respect to verb agreement, just like Karitiana. The information I've presented in this section can be summarized as follows. Consider the Mandarin data in 9. They are coming from Shanghai, they criticized me, and I scolded them. In 9a, we can observe that the verb doesn't take any inflections to agree with its third person plural S argument. Likewise, we can see that the verb in B isn't inflected to agree with its A argument, and that the verb in C isn't inflected to agree with its O argument. Thus, in Mandarin, S, A, and O arguments all behave similarly with respect to verb agreement. None of them force the verb to take agreement inflections. Accordingly, we could say that in Mandarin, verb agreement follows a neutral pattern. So that just about wraps up today's episode. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. Please also feel free to share any thoughts, questions, or suggestions for improvement in the comments. Toodaloo!